Bienvenido!
And welcome to our painting series. This week we're going to talk about pigments.
So, in an earlier session, we did allude to pigments, but I think we kind of rushed through it a little bit. So, we're going to do a bit of a deeper dive. So, Ash, what is a pigment?
Well, pigment is what gives your paint color, basically. It's what you dig out of the ground to make your paints colorful.
And what's a dye?
They are different in that dye is soluble and pigment is not. It's insoluble.
That's right. And there is actually something that's a little bit in between. You can take a dye and mix it with a salt to basically precipitate it. So basically it sticks onto something and becomes insoluble itself. And when that happens, that's called a lake. So if you ever heard of colors like rose madder lake or scarlet lake, they're referring to something that in its natural state is a dye, but it's being used as a pigment by precipitating it.
So, what do you have in your box? What do you use?
Oh, you mean in my tabaret?
Yes, in your tabaret.
Okay, let's have a look. So, let me see. Lots of goodies here. Looks like I need to replace my red. So this is sort of what I would have in a typical palette.
So let's start with the white. You use titanium white.
Yes, and most painters today would use titanium white. So in older days, painters had a bit of a conundrum. There were the two main whites that they had available to them was a flake white and a zinc white. And flake white was a nice opaque white, great for mixing, but it wasn't pure white. It had a kind of a yellowish tinge. And zinc white, on the other hand, was very pure, but was very transparent.
Right.
And when titanium white came along, you got the best of both worlds. You had a really thick paint, very opaque, and very white. In fact, too white. In fact, I seldom would use titanium white without actually putting a little bit of yellow
Something in there.
into it.
Yeah.
But it is very, very solid. Of all the paints,
It's like toothpaste with concrete added to it.
yeah, toothpaste. I wouldn't brush your teeth with this stuff. In fact, I wouldn't brush your teeth with any of these things. So most paints, most pigments are toxic to some degree. I think with common sense, they're safe enough to use. Don't put a paintbrush in your mouth.
Like Van Gogh.
Yeah. So the next color.
You got three blues going on there. You've got your three main blues in your palette. So I guess start with ultramarine.
Okay. So ultramarine is the workhorse of blues.
It is.
It has a long history. Back in Egyptian times?
Yes, I believe so. Yeah, they actually made it out of lapis lazuli, I believe.
Yes, and I think you have some lapis lazuli.
I do. This is lapis lazuli. It is a beautiful royal blue color, and the Egyptians actually used to make their purple and blue dyes out of lapis lazuli.
And it was basically a color for the royalty.
Yes, it was very expensive. It was discovered in Afghanistan, and it's very difficult to mine. Well, it was at the time. So it was rare.
So modern ultramarine, French ultramarine as it's called, is actually made from synthetically, a lot less expensive. In fact, it's one of the cheaper blues available in the market. It's the workhorse of blues, great for mixing, has a slightly reddish tinge to it, so it's not exactly a straight up the middle blue. So that's my first blue. Second blue is cobalt blue.
Cobalt blue is like the truest of blues. It is the blue of blues. It is expensive. It is also a weak blue. A weak blue in terms of how it stands up to other colors.
That's right. So weak means that if you took a little bit of orange and mixed it with ultramarine, it would tint the color a little bit. I mean, it would certainly change the color. But you take the same amount of orange and mix it with cobalt blue, and you've got quite a muted color already. So it just basically doesn't stand up very well to other colors. But
yes.
A beautiful color. And the closest thing we have to straight up the middle blue.
Yes, it is the truest of blues.
So the other blue I have is a phthalo blue.
Phthalo blue is awesome. It's one of my faves. It's highly staining pigment. It's slightly greenish in compared to the other blues. And it's inexpensive. Woohoo!
Yes, it's a relatively recent invention, and you're right. It is staining. When I always can tell when a student in the class is using phthalo blue because it's stained the color of their brushes, it's in their clothes, it's in their hands, it's in the desk. It is incredibly. It's the Energizer Bunny of paints. It just keeps on going. I actually never used it much. I used it a little bit as an accent color, like if imagine like an awning or a jacket or something. I really wanted to get a very strong blue, but I've changed a little bit. I actually started using it more, and in fact, recent painting I did, I've used phthalo blue as one of the dominant blues in the painting. So I'm getting used to it.
Yes. Yes, some people gravitate towards it right away. Other people have to sort of
warm up to
it.
All right, how about this one?
One blue that we actually didn't mention that used to be in everybody's palette. Prussian blue would have been pretty important in an artist's palette, right?
That's right. There's probably a lot of colors that have sort of fallen by the wayside, and the only people who use them today are people who want to recreate the look of the old masters. And
that's right. Purists.
Purists, and they will pull out Venetian red. They will use flake white rather than the new titanium white, and something like a Prussian blue. It's a beautiful color. There's no question. It's a lovely color. But today, it's like phthalo blue kind of beats it hands down.
Yeah, it doesn't perform. It doesn't stand up next to our new blues that we've discovered.
Interesting fact: came from the Prussian army. The color of the Prussian army uniforms was Prussian blue. That's where I got the name.
Cool. Dioxazine purple. It is a single pigment. Even though we kind of think of purple as being kind of halfway between red and blue, dioxazine is a single pigment. It's very, very strong. And it is right down the middle. So you've got kind of equal amounts blue, equal amounts red. And on the opposite side of a dioxazine, you would have something like a yellow, lemon yellow. And lemon yellow kind of works in the same way. If you split that right down the middle, it can act in like the warmer tones and the cooler tones. So if you actually take our color wheel, you can draw basically a straight line right through the middle there. And what you've got is you've got some warmth and you've got the cool side. And so this purple straddles both of those, the cool and the warm. And this lemon yellow also straddles between cool and warm. The alternative to a dioxazine purple is a cobalt violet, and it is gorgeous. I've never worked with it myself because...
And it's expensive.
Yes,
it's
not
massively
cheap.
expensive. I just looked up a 37 mil, which is what these are here. These are 37 mil tubes. 37 mil tube of cobalt violet, $50.
Yes, it is not cheap. Dioxazine is not inferior by any means. It is an awesome purple. It's not like you're cheaping out by using dioxazine. It's also awesome.
And I've certainly been using it more and more. I find, especially in combination with a lemon yellow, you could just get some awesome neutrals with those two colors.
I've just always loved purple, so I've always used it.
Okay. What about this baby?
Alizarin. Alizarin is also quite transparent. It used to be made from a plant, the rubia plant.
And the roots of the rubia plant have a compound in them called alizarin. And they used to use, so if anyone remembers like Rose Madder or Madder Lake, that is actually from that rubia plant. And then later on, they found a synthetic way to manufacture that alizarin.
They figured out how to do it without having to grow the plant.
That's right. And so the modern day alizarin crimson is synthetically produced. There are a lot of people who claim that it's fugitive. In other words, it fades in light. I have to say I've been using it for many years and have never found that to be the case. But I do find that it's getting more and more difficult to find it. A lot of places, the stores, you will see alizarin crimson permanent, but it's not the same thing. You don't get the dark tones that you get with real alizarin crimson. Mm-hmm. So An alternative is quinacridone violet, that can work as a reasonable alternative to it if you can't get.
We're getting into the CADs now.
So my almost gone tube of cadmium red. So what can we say about cadmiums?
They get a lot of use in this household, that's for sure.
They certainly do.
Cadmium colors in general are really opaque.
Yes, they are. It is true to say that I know a lot of painters have trouble with reds. It is really hard to get a pure bright red. Cadmium red probably comes closest, but the challenge a lot of people have with reds is it can be difficult at times to get a red that you can brighten up without getting a really pinky kind of color or an orangey kind of color, and that's one of the challenges. Even Cad red, when you start to add white, it does get kind of pinky. Cad red light is a nice alternative. So if you're ever in a situation where you really need to get a bright red, like it's tomatoes in a still life or something like that, you can reach for Cad red light, and it's not the same as mixing Cad red and a bit of Cad orange or something, or white. It is quite a different color. But Cad red is typically what I would have for most of the time. I would only pull that out in odd situations.
Yes, me too.
The next cadmium on the list is cadmium orange.
You can get close to cadmium orange by mixing Cad red and Cad yellow.
You can get pretty close actually, and again, cadmium orange is probably a color that you could treat as non-essential to if you're trying to work with a limited palette. But there will be, again, going back to the idea of a still life, if you've got oranges in a still life and you really want to get a brilliant orange, then it's useful to reach for cadmium orange. The other thing I find it useful for is just speed. If you're working with a painting and
don't have to mix it,
and you know that you're going to be using cobalt blue and an orange to mute it, then having to mix red and yellow all the time to get that can just slow you down a bit, and having a tube of orange just means you can get there quicker.
So far we only have 2 colors at the moment that you can technically mix on your own, but we do buy the paint tubes pre-mixed. So dioxazine, like we said, you can mix red and blue. Which
I did for many years. So I painted for many years before actually bringing cobalt or dioxazine purple into my palette.
Yeah,
same thing with orange.
Same thing with the orange. So the orange, you can definitely, we all know you can make orange with red and yellow, but it is just not the same thing. The Cad orange is that beautiful, pure, true orange.
Right. So my cadmium yellow.
It is the last of our Cads. Again, it is very opaque. So basically you can use this to cover really nicely.
Nice warm color.
It's beautiful. Yeah.
Very strong.
Nice true yellow.
Oh my goodness, is that the time?
I guess we underestimated how much there is to say about pigments.
I guess so. Okay, we're going to cut it off here, and we'll be right back in a moment with part 2.
And don't forget, questions and comments below.
And don't forget,
hit that like button.
We'll see you back in a second. Bye.
Yo, listen up, here's the story about a little guy that lives in a blue world. And all day and all night, and everything he sees is just blue. Like him, inside and outside. Blue his house with a blue little window and a blue Corvette. And everything is blue for him and himself and everybody around. 'Cause he ain't got nobody to listen to.